Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm so excited to be here. I hope everybody's doing well. Hey, Logan, lovely weather we've been having today. Hey, am I right? I mean, same with you, Rosie. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. Anyways, we're here to talk about the meaning of life and existence itself. So I think we should get on into that conversation.
Thank you
Hey,
for that beautiful
So
intro.
Logan, oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Hmm.
I did a bit of improv in school. I don't know if you could tell, but anyways, like I said, nope. Go away, Hank. We're not here to discuss these particular topics. All right. We are here to talk about some serious stuff. And I've gotta put good old Hank to sleep old Yeller style for a few hours here in order to do that. So what's first on the agenda? The agenda.
Well, what I was thinking is because, I only know you by hearsay, is to kind of get a feel for your worldview and, why you believe what you believe, just so I can kind of get, a good understanding of who Ayden is. Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, sure, absolutely. I guess it's a bit of a broad net to cast right off the bat. Not to say that that's a bad thing, but
I'll ask you 5 questions, kind of to narrow it down.
sure.
Where do you believe we come from?
Where do I
Humanity.
believe we come from? I
Mhm.
believe that the scientific consensus as we currently understand it is that we came from other ape-like ancestors, that we came from Australopithecus, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalis, these sorts of species which progenerate us and which we have numerous fossil evidence for. We can observe within our ancestry the fact that although they are not necessarily as complex as us, for example, I mean, Homo neanderthalis, we can see cave paintings of them analogous to those of people, but they don't seem to paint or express ideas that are quite as abstract as what we might paint. Sure, they'll paint things like animals, they'll paint natural environments, they'll paint things that they actually see. But we, on the other hand, would paint more abstract things. We would paint things that no human would necessarily see, but we came up with in our own imagination, in our own mind. But it is still undeniable in both the skeletal fossil evidence that we have for this and the sequencing of the genes that we have within our own DNA that we come from a previous species, that we come from a previous progenitor, that whether that be Australopithecus, Homo erectus, or just Homo sapien or anything in between, I think that the genetic evidence seems to indicate that it's all of those things. I think that we come from a little bit of all of those things, and I think it's only a matter of looking into the DNA evidence that we have at our disposal, things like our retroviral DNA, the bacteria that we find in our DNA, and sequencing those things and finding those things to be so incredibly similar to those of this. I mean, we have ancestors like the chimpanzee, which share some only 3% difference in its genetic coding than us. So it's not even to say that we don't have ancestors that are very analogous to us, but that's the long and short of where I would say we came from. I mean, I can expand upon that if you want, or we could go to the next question.
No. What you're talking basically is the theory of evolution. I'll ask you a side question on that
Well, sure.
particular view. Is are you willing and or open to having that view challenged?
Well, sure, absolutely. But I would want to preface me having my mind changed on that with the idea that the evidence that is presented in order to refute evolution is stronger, more consistent, and more readily available than that of the evidence for the theory of evolution. And that's
You
going to
mean
be quite the thing
creation?
to surmount. Well, yeah. Yeah, and that's
Okay.
going to be quite the hill to surmount, considering that there's more evidence for the theory of evolution than we even have for the theory of gravity.
When was the last time you did the research on the evidence for creation? How long ago?
I mean, anytime that I interact with people and try to have discussions with them, I will look into the claims that they make. I'll look into the things that they posit to be true, whether they post links or whether they recommend that I look into something or check it out. I mean, a good example of that, I don't know if it's still around, but me and this other guy, Adam, we had a conversation, and he provided me with links to his he's more of a eternalist as far as the universe is concerned. He thinks that the
Oh,
universe has existed forever, whereas I don't think that that's true. I think that it's
okay,
finite in existence. But the point I'm making
cool.
being that if somebody like him is willing to supply information, of course, I'll be willing to look into it. I think that anybody that claims that they're sure in their ideology but is incapable of looking into evidence otherwise is inherently closed-minded.
Bravo for you. So I would consider you more of a Berean. I mean, I appreciate that, because I've often
Agree.
spoken to people. Yeah, I'll explain it later. I've often talked to people and try to change their mind, but they're not open to even viewing the evidence for, why I believe what I believe. And it seems lazy. Don't you want to know the truth? Don't you want to know, what is truth? And it seems that they just want to sit in their little worlds and go la 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 la, and they don't want to hear you out, and that's a little frustrating. And you just sort of like have to close the door on that, because if someone's not willing or seeking, how can you provide to them if they're just want to be stagnant? So I really do appreciate hearing you say
Well,
that.
yeah, there's in a stagnation in the search of evidence or truth is a stagnation of the mind, in my opinion. And
Yes.
I think that anybody that does that loses out on such a great deal of information that could enhance their understanding of the world around them.
It's called growth. Yeah, growth is important.
But I hope that
So
I hope that sufficiently answers your question.
yeah, no, I appreciate that. And knowing that you are not an eternalist is also of great benefit in where I would um, have an argument that would be beneficial, I would hope. But anyway, we'll go to these 5 questions first, just so I can get a good feel. And that might be
Sure,
what, if we
absolutely.
can get through that today, that might be just what the only thing we get accomplished. Where,
Sure.
so having said that, where do you think we are going?
Where do I think we are going?
Mm,
Do you
as,
mean like the entirety of the human race, or?
yeah, like
Well,
as time
I think
progresses,
I
how do you see things panning out?
I think that it's all a matter of the time scale that you look at, really. I mean, the amount of progress that we as a species have made relative to our entire existence. If you look back, archaeologically speaking, we can come across Neolithic sites of Homo sapiens sapiens, people who really, like, anthropologically speaking, are exactly like us, that would have the same brain as us, that would think very similar thoughts to us and would react in their own way to their environment, sure, but ultimately are human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that over the 200,000 year time span that we've existed as a species, compared to the 1,000 years in which we have advanced now, I think that that speaks to a awakening of the human species and its understanding of the world around it. And I think that it's an awakening that, not to be rude or disrespectful, I think that the fact that so many people throw at the feet of God these amazing accomplishments that we as humanity have accomplished, we as people have discovered for ourselves and brought ourselves out of the misery and degradation of hunting gathering, where if you trip and you break your leg, there's probably a coin flip of a chance that you're going to die, as opposed to today where you can just go to a hospital and have that mended. That's not God that did that. if he even exists, if there is a God, which, yeah, I mean, I can preface what I'm saying with the fact that I am in fact open to there being a God. But if a God does exist, one thing we can definitively verify is that it wasn't him that gave us the ability to do these things. It wasn't him that gave us the ability to construct a skyscraper or to cure smallpox. It was us. And I think that me being an optimist, me being somebody who has an incredible amount of faith in the human race as a whole, I think that we are destined for such great things in our future. I think that there is a lot that we need to overcome in order to reach that future. I think there's a lot of things that need to be resolved, but I think the amount of those things that need to be resolved has steadily gotten smaller and smaller over the theme of our history. I think that ultimately is the theme of our history. It's finding problems that we encounter on a daily basis and solving them as best as we possibly can. Now, sure, if you want to say that we solve those problems because a creator made us, or he made the mind that makes us solve those problems, that's an entirely different discussion. But I think that we as a species are destined for very great things.
Do you think
Can you
one day we
repeat
could
that? That
evolve
was
into X-Men?
that is a topic for another discussion. You might want to pin that one, Logan, because I would have some things to say about that. Now, you did say something really interesting there, and I'd like for you to repeat it just so I can grasp what you said. It was a philosophical thought that if you want to credit that to a creator, it was just like 2 sentences ago. Do you remember what you said?
Sure. Yeah, I think that theists, I think that people with a theistic mindset will look at that very same information that I laid out right there and will come to a different conclusion. While I will say that that's the advent of human ingenuity, well, that's the advent of human thinking and human ability to solve problems and adapt to their surroundings. The creationist, at least as far as what I've typically encountered, will say, well, no, that's not humans. That's God that's doing that. That's God that's guiding our path along the way that it is right now and is guiding our fate ultimately.
Okay.
I mean, sure, if you want to say that we individually have free will, then fine. But I mean, just based on the fact that you have a Christian ideology, I can deduce the fact that ultimately you know that God has a plan for everybody, and God has an ultimate path that he knows humanity will walk down. He knows how things are going to turn out. He knows the ultimate fate of humanity. And I think that if there is a God and he is at all loving, I don't think that a God would condemn us to judgment. I don't think a God would condemn us for mistakes that we made within our own lives to an eternity of suffering and pain and torment. I think that he would allow us to improve upon ourselves and continue down this path of improvement. Because if there's anything that I've observed as a student of history, looking back upon our past, it's that while we are definitely an abhorrent species in many aspects, we have shed so many of those superstitions and so many of those backwards ways of thinking that made us a regressive species that was incapable of so many of the things that we have done within those last 1,000 years that I'd mentioned. And I mean, I could give you any innumerable amounts of examples of things over this last 1,000 years that have just fundamentally flipped the script of how we operate as a species and how we conduct ourselves upon this earth. Now, the Christian, once again, will probably say that, well, that just foretells the end times, or that foretells the coming of the end of the age, as Christ might have said. But I look at that very much so as an upward trend rather than a downward trend. I don't think that we're heading towards apocalypse. I think we're heading towards better times.
So, yeah, what you're saying is that we're improving over time. I had another point absolutely too, but yeah, I okay. Wow. Okay. I definitely have some counters to that, but that really gives me something to work with there. Thank you. I appreciate that. That was very insightful and inspiring,
no problem.
Even in myself. The next question.
See, can I just? Oh, okay. Oh, I was just going to say really quickly, and I'm not saying this because it either proves or disproves the validity of Christianity. I just simply say this because, as somebody who doesn't necessarily ascribe to the beliefs of God, it is so much more freeing to be able to talk with all of these people about all of these ideas and all of these points of view without having so many of these presuppositional ideas about Christianity in my mind and having to pick a side, so to speak, about these things ahead of time. I think that it's lent myself to such a better form of understanding of these things than I otherwise would have had. And like I said, that's not a commentary on the truth or untruth of Christianity. It's just a comment of my own personal experience.
Yeah, your observations and processing the
But
information.
go ahead with your question.
Okay. What is our problem?
What do you mean? What is our problem?
As
what is our
as
problem as a
humanity.
species?
Yeah, what is our problem as a species? You sort of answered a lot of it in the last question, but it might give you a platform or a stepping off point to maybe elaborate a little more, like the things, what causes us, like we can see around and it's evident that evil exists or bad exists.
Well,
why,
if you want to,
so what
if you
is
want
our
to call
problem?
it evil.
Okay, fair enough. So
I mean,
yeah, elaborate there. Do you believe in evil?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't think that evil is an objective thing. I don't think that there is an objective good or evil. And I think that the objectivity, quote unquote, of morality is disproven simply in the fact that if you get any two people together and you talk about anything as far as morality is concerned for long enough, there will become a disagreement. There will be discourse. There was discourse amongst the apostles that knew Christ his entire time that he had his ministry. And even they disagreed on things. They disagreed on issues. And I think that the idea that this lends to an objectivism in morality is just backwards thinking. Now, I don't say backwards to be insulting. That's just how I see it. I think it puts the cart before the horse.
It actually, in my research, according to the evolution worldview, it actually, at least you're consistent. Because within the evolutionary worldview, there is no objective evil. I mean, unless you like go to.
Well, I want to be
Go ahead.
I want to be very clear and drawing a line in the sand very quickly there, because evolution doesn't have anything to say on morality per se. Evolution
That's right.
as a theory
simply
states that
right.
There was a diversity. It basically explains the diversity of life from abiogenesis. And that's another, I'm not saying that you've made this mistake, but it's another mistake that I see from a lot of creationists to say that evolution in any way addresses abiogenesis or deals with the idea of abiogenesis. Is just a misunderstanding in what evolution is. So
right, there's a difference between philosophy
I'm sure
and
that
science.
you won't. Well, I don't think that either is necessarily a philosophy. I think that
that's not what I meant.
thought you were talking about abiogenesis and evolution. I thought you were talking about sorry, I know that you're talking about morality. I figured it out.
No.
I figured it out.
Okay, yeah, the two that like science, evolution does not have anything to say about morality. So trying to understand morality from an evolutionary point of view, it doesn't have any, evolution and science, the way that the evolutionary scientists view the world, there is no morality in it because it's a philosophical category. It's not in the same category,
well, I mean,
people
it's
make
ultimately
that mistake.
Your position on morality. Your position on morality could be entirely divorced from whether or not you think that evolution is real or not. You could believe that morality is objective and true without the existence of a god or without the belief in an idea that we evolved from things. And I actually want to
Right.
stop myself even in that, because the idea that the idea that things evolved or that things are capable of evolving, I don't think is a belief at this point. I think we can demonstrate that. Now, if you want to call that microevolution, then sure, we could call it microevolution, but if things are capable of evolving very small characteristical changes over a short period of time, like a good example is in Northern California in the 1990s, they did an experiment with E. coli bacteria, and they tried to basically induce a trait in it that was mutated completely on its own, that it had a characteristic at that point it had never had before. And within a few months, they had been able to get this E. coli bacteria that had only digested other bacteria before that point to be able to digest citrate. And citrate was the medium that it's basically almost the equivalent of, if you have a fish in water, citrate is the water equivalent of this bacterium. It's what it lived within. So it evolved from being able to eat other bacterium to be able to eat the very medium in which it lives in the span of only months. Now, somebody that thinks that evolution is true and looks at that data will say that over a very long period of time, that those changes will accumulate to the point where speciation will occur, to the point where some other mutations that will present themselves in part of that population of bacteria will be so different from the original population of that bacteria that they'll no longer be able to sexually reproduce. Now, if they produce via mitosis, if they produce via splitting off asexually, that seems to slow, so to speak, evolution, because it doesn't introduce as many new traits or new characteristics into its offspring. But it still will eventually accumulate those changes. It's all just a question of time. And I think that more even than things like the fossil record, which we can get into as well if you want to, but the fossil record is another smoking gun for evolution, as far as the fact that we can see these fossils that are layered in a very specific way, where there is no mixing, there is no difference in stratal fossiling that we can see. Like if you see if you look at different layers of rock or granite or limestone, and you find fossils within them, in the Carboniferous layer, you're going to see a bunch of giant insects, because the Carboniferous period in our planet was a time where oxygen levels were far higher. They were at about 30 or 40% compared to what they are today at about 20. And this allows for insect exoskeletons to grow a lot larger, because insects basically breathe through that exoskeleton. They don't have lungs. So
Right.
because of that higher oxygen intake, you'll see this layer where insects are going to be a lot larger than they are in any other layer. And we don't find those giant insects in any other layer. We won't find things like trilobites past a certain time in fossiling either. And this simply wouldn't be the case if these things did not evolve and change their characteristics over time. Now, I don't know what response you would have to that, or if you just want to move to the next question, but I'm open to either.
I probably will have to have my responses on another time because we have 10 minutes left. But yeah, I definitely do have
Sorry.
responses for that too. No, these are I understand the evolutionary view. It's really good to get a refresher in it. I'm like, yeah, I remember that. But my worldview has been, dramatically changed, through divine intervention. But I do remember what you're talking about, and there is a rebuttal for it. So that's great. Thank you for that.
There's so many threads to tug on for later conversations. You'd mentioned at the very beginning that we'll never be left wanting after this conversation for more things to talk about, and that's definitely true.
Yeah, I can see that. This is going to be very stimulating and educational for me, and frankly a little intimidating, because you're frankly privileged with being the first open, kind and friendly, respectful atheist that I am honored to actually interact with, and try to find middle ground in all this, and my goal is a lot more modest than a lot of them. A lot of evangelists is, I just want to put a stone in your shoe. You know, something that kind of like, okay, I need to think about this. I need to, I'm not trying to convert you. It's not my job to convert you. That's God's job. I'm just here to give you things
Sure.
to think about. Okay. So
I'll just
the
say
next,
on the same note,
go ahead.
I'll just say really quickly on the same note, don't be surprised if I slip one in yours.
But that would
It-
hurt your feet.
No, I mean, I really have a crazy testimony. And we could talk about that another day. Like, it's literally counting me down. So I'm like pressured now. But what is the solution? What is the solution to our problem? And I'll throw this one in there as well, just for time's sake, and you can incorporate them together, is and then where are we going?
Sure. Well, how do we the first one was, how do we fix the issue? How do we fix the problem of
What is the
our
problem? What
issues,
is
what you were saying?
Yeah, what is the problem? What is the solution?
Okay.
And then where are we going?
I think the biggest problem that we as a species have is our constant need and urge to cling to superstition and to tradition in the face of objectively, or at least as close to objectivism as you can find in things like statistics, these things dragging down our ability to prosper as a society. I mean, and no matter how you phrase it, if we allow things like mega churches, or if we allow these giant institutions of religion to take things that otherwise could be used, resources that could be used for the common good of humanity, and use them for their own aggrandizement, no matter how they phrase it or justify it, it is ultimately what it is aggrandizement. I think that humanity as a whole needs to fully climb out of this pit that it's dug for itself of superstition, and it needs to fully become aware of its own capabilities. I think that we're a very I don't think shy is the best term. I think we're very uncomfortable in our own proverbial skin as a species. We don't quite realize our full potential. And because we don't realize our full potential, we rely on superstition, and we rely on other entities that might exist to guide us and to push us along a certain path that we may find. Now, I've always held to the idea that it is more comfortable it would be fundamentally more comfortable if that was the case. It would be more comforting were there to be a creator, and that this creator is looking out for us and watching over us and has our best interests at its own heart. But whether or not that be the case, I think no matter what, humanity is going to have to realize its own potential for it to climb out of its problems of impoverishment and wealth inequality and environmental degradation. I think those are all things that are going to be surmounted by us rather than by some outside force. And I think we're going to do it through the sciences, and that we're going to do it through a unity in our humanity, which has only increased as time has gone on. I mean, I think that globalism and globalization, while some people find that a very frightening term and one to run away from, I think that ultimately it is a unifying force for us, and it's a force for the betterment of all of humanity. Now, where are we headed? That's precisely where I kind of touched on there. I think we're heading towards globalism. I think that we're heading towards a hegemonic society. Now, will it ever become fully hegemonic? I don't think it necessarily will. I think that unless we just fundamentally adapt a different understanding of reality, there's always going to be some level of tribalism in us. There's always going to be some level of us versus them, and there's always going to be some, if not real, illusory notion of there being different factions or different states or different countries. I think that's always going to be the case, but I think that that's ultimately what it's going to turn into. Rather than being a real actual threat, I think it's going to become a paper tiger that people use as an outlet to vent those frustrations rather than actually wreak their real world consequences upon humanity. So I hope that answered that.
That was great. You are so much on the other side of the coin. Because what you are describing there is exactly his plan. And it's also mentioned and described in Revelation and the book of Daniel. So, on one sense, you are, you're hearing the message and you're agreeing with the message that is the voice of the world, or the spirit within the world. And it's just fascinating to hear it. It sounds so good. I don't have much, I'd have to really process it, because like I said, I haven't one-on-one spoken with anyone. Oh, now it says less than a minute. Personally, one-on-one, but what you're describing there is exactly what the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel is talking about, and is coming to fruition in our lifetime. So, were you aware of that?
Well, sure. I mean, like I've read these scriptures. I'll be honest with you, I haven't read the entirety of the Bible in about a decade at this point. It's been a while since I've done a full read through, but I have read those texts before, and I am aware of the overall themes of them.